Great Scott. Great Scott. Great Scott.
Hello everyone, welcome to Great Scott. I'm Scotty V. It's good to see you. Today I wanted to talk about Superboy #1. It came out last week. I like to give you a little bit of time so that you can read it before I spoil things for you. We found out some new things in this book. We also found out some things that seem to be the same. Superman is definitely the supplier of his alien Kryptonian DNA, but they also announced that there is a human donor, and they have not yet said who that was. One of the lab partners who dies in all the explosions is about to tell Red, who seems to be a main character for now, who his human donor is, and for her to be careful and to watch out, which certainly seems to precipitate the answer being Lex Luthor, because he would be extremely dangerous and narcissistic. Now Red, when she sees Superboy in the virtual reality program, is surprised that he ignores the woman in the burning house's calls for help. The reason I think he does this is because, though we don't know until we turn the next page and find out it's virtual reality, but he mentions himself that he knows he's taking part in virtual reality testing, so he knows he's not really in Kansas, he knows he's not really going to school, and he knows there's not really a woman in a burning house. So this really isn't that much of a surprise if you knew that everything you were doing didn't mean anything, but there was a possibility that telepathy played a part in him knowing that Rose, the only character in the virtual reality with him that also exists, is a real person. Then you might also focus all your attentions on that person. My perception of this is that that's exactly what he was doing. He sensed with his powers that there was something special about this character in the virtual reality, and maybe he even knows that she's the only real person there, because he does say he likes Rose, she's a nice person. The fire going on would be inconsequential because he knows it's part of the program. So I think in the book they're trying to make us worry that maybe he's more influenced by the Lex Luthor human part of him that is evil, and not as much the Superman, because Superman would have jumped immediately to save that woman. Which brings me to another point. Superboy is shown to have superior intellect. Maybe this is because he was programmed with it, or perhaps it's because Lex Luthor in fact is the human part of him and he got some of his genius level intellect. The issue I have with this is when you read Action Comics, it doesn't seem that Superman has any particularly high-level intelligence. Not that he's stupid, but it's mostly action from beginning to end, which is good in a book entitled Action. But there's not a whole lot of character development, and we don't see any of Clark's real intelligence. But there hasn't been time for that yet. Hopefully when Superman #1 comes out next week, we'll find a little bit out about where he came from, where the Kents are, and why he is who he is. My problem with Superman as played even less intelligent than Batman in a lot of instances is that I think his learning ability is enhanced. He can read through a book much quicker than anyone else. He can absorb information. He has enhanced senses, so anytime there's a scene that needs a detective, I personally wouldn't call Batman. I would call someone like Wolverine, someone like Superman, who can hear, who can sense, who can smell. Batman's a regular guy. So to portray Superman in kind of a dumb light, in other words, every time you turn around, Batman's able to spring kryptonite on him. He should just be able to spring up into the sky and be out of the way of it and stop the person immediately. But now we see that even Superboy is going to have a lot of knowledge. He may not have a great bit of wisdom because he's brand new, but he's going to be very knowledgeable. And I think that this is in part because he was programmed with all this knowledge, but also because half of him comes from Lex Luthor. Though that hasn't been established yet, I think we're going to find that out. That's probably one thing that also hasn't changed. I mentioned the Kents before, and that's the one thing that bothers me about this reboot entirely, and that is that the Kents will be dead before Superman becomes Superman, and they'll no longer be a part of his life. I always liked his visits to home and the pep talks he would get and the advice he would get from Jonathan and Martha, so I'm going to miss that. But I didn't think of it until now, because I only just read Superboy, that Superboy also now won't have their influence, and he won't have it at all. In the previous books, he was living with the Kents in Smallville, he fought enemies in Smallville, and he loved the Kents like they were his parents. He lived like Clark did when he was young, and now we're not going to have any of that. Further, the powers that be and DC headquarters are saying that important stories still matter. The death of Superman still matters. Batman still had 5 Robins, which is entirely impossible because those Robins couldn't have grown up in just 5 years of time. Nightwing alone hasn't had the time to grow up into a full-fledged superhero. So it's a little silly. And now, if the death of Superman stood, that would mean that Superboy came out with his leather jacket and his gloves, and that no one knew who he was, and that he was claiming to be the real Superman, which, based on this new continuity, couldn't have happened, which is fine if it's a new continuity, but they really need to just come out and say, we're starting over from scratch, nothing matters. But they don't want to do that because they don't want to anger people, so they have said that the death of Superman still stands. We don't know what parts, we don't know how, we don't know why, and clearly Superboy couldn't have been a part, at least not in the way he was originally. Thanks for watching, everybody. This has been another edition of Great Scott. Remember, always look up in the sky.